Alright, hit the button. Anyway, response video on the Just Say No to Kids channel, I think. Anyway, to Hythloday, who's made 5 videos. 5? Kind of going over the same stuff. Instead of making an affirmative argument, just explaining why life is so cool and that we should spread it all over the universe because it's so functional and so makes a profit. No, instead of doing that, he keeps arguing that there's this convoluted, very specific language dependent argument that somehow you have committed a logical fallacy. You have broken the rules of logic. If you compare a circumstance where you create a non-circumstance. So you have two choices. Something, you'll make something, you'll not make something. And you can't compare the not make circumstance because there's no not made then. So it's kind of like he's almost arguing, almost, I'd say exactly arguing, that if, for example, you aborted a defective fetus, you couldn't claim you did anything productive or good because there was no broken fetus to enjoy the goodness of not being broken. There was no broken adult suffering for you to prevent. He's almost arguing that prevention has no value logically. And, well, he is arguing that. And he's just not realizing that's exactly what he's arguing. But he's doing it in this obvious, way of strangling language and getting on words of whether you say cause to exist or comparing, using different kinds of language somehow makes it okay. So if you say cause to exist instead of saying made existent, it's not this, so it's these kind of subtleties in language for which he's making a distinction, and it's just, there's no point. So anyway, the BENATAR argument, just to defend it one more time, and again, he wrote extensively on why this is the way it is a simple argument that the good, whenever you prevent a good thing, you're not causing a bad. So if something that doesn't need to take place doesn't take place, it's not a bad thing. So, as long as it's not needed, as long as the person isn't made deprivated or harmed or in a degraded state somehow by not having the extra thing. So, like me not having $100 in my pocket is not a bad thing. Even though $100 would be good, it's not a bad that I don't have $100 in my pocket, especially if there's no place to spend it anyway. Just having it for the sake of having it would be nice, but it's not necessary. And therefore there's no negative value if I don't have the $100 in my pocket. That kind of thing. And so that's all BENATAR is kind of pointing out, that not having fun when you don't need to have fun is not a bad thing. It's not harm if no one needs the fun. And it's only when you create the individual who needs it do you create the liability of satisfying the need. So the argument is more about the fact that destroying a need, taking a need away, is not a bad thing. It just intrinsically isn't, because all the things that are needed for no reason except because of the biological mechanism. It all comes from reproducing for the sake of reproduction, survival for the sake of survival. And so once you break the chain somewhere, there's no longer any need in the mechanism. No, the mechanism doesn't say there needs to be Martians. Nothing says there needs to be Martians. Only a human perception could say somehow, in some strangled way, they could possibly be horny for Mexicans, for Martians. No one's horny for the Martians. Not too horny for the Mexicans either. But anyway, no one's horny for them. Okay, no one needs Martians to exist. Therefore, their non-existence does not create a harm at all. And the fact that they don't exist means that they're not suffering. So that's the positive. And so the math is just that simple. That preventing harm, right, is good. And preventing a good is not a bad. Unless the good is preventing harm, right? So that's the problem is, again, we're back to the same argument as before, is that good is used to describe two different things. The good of rescuing somebody from harm, that's called a good. And then we have this other good, which is like cupcakes and watching your favorite team win the World Series. Those things are in a different kind of category of good. They're not necessary things, but they're somehow pleasurable when you need them to happen, when you have a hunger for it. So the argument is more about, BENATAR's argument is basically, if you eliminate hunger, you haven't created deprivation, because the hunger was never needed. So if I eliminate sports, let's say, if I could eradicate it from existence on planet Earth, no one ever or just say one sport, horse racing. I took away horse racing from all of human history or memory. There would be no need to put horse racing in. It's not something needed. It's not necessary to anything. I didn't create any harm by eliminating something that nobody needed to see. They only need it when they become addicted to it. They only need it when they become attached to it. I'm not deprivated because I don't need to go see a horse race. I don't live a deprived life. So again, it's like the vegetarian arguments, like all these arguments, that our need is what generates the value, not the value intrinsic. And the only thing that has intrinsic value, fundamental value, is the obvious thing of eliminating a harm, destroying a negative. Converting a negative into a positive has intrinsic value. But playing this game with, creating a neutral good, a good that's somehow above a neutral, that's suspect. Creating an addiction and then say you satisfied the addiction, therefore you did a good thing. Making a mess, cleaning up the mess is a good thing? No. So BENATAR's argument is basically, don't create the need, and then your math is all good. There's no harm, so there's no negative potential. There's no negative potential when Martians don't exist. You only open the door to negative when you put the Martians on Mars. And there's obviously no need to do that, no rational need. So, there's no logical disconnect here. There's no breaking of the rules of logic. We would apply the same kind of standards of judgment if we were judging any other thing. And he just isn't willing. I wanted to say he isn't smart enough, but anyway, I'll just say he isn't willing to take the question logically one step back, because that's really what it's about. It's like you could ask, should we have nuclear power plants or shouldn't we? It's clearly a logical question you could ask. Does nuclear power survive cost to benefit analysis? And I won't go through all the arguments, but you can come up with an equation and you can come up with an answer to the question: are we better off with them, or are we better off without them? And it would be a perfectly logical analysis that you could conduct in terms of measuring how many people are killed by them, or how much radiation they create, or how much expense they create in the long term, and all that kind of stuff. And you can come up with an answer based on what the alternatives are. But the real question would be, do we really need the energy? We only see the need for the nuclear power plants is just because of the need for the energy. So if I take away the need for the energy, if I give you an eternal energy source of a perpetual motion or something, or whatever, some new energy source that's completely clean and free, you wouldn't need nuclear power plants anymore, because there wouldn't be any need served by them. So it's all so the problem is with existence is that it creates need. We are need machines. We don't resolve need, we create need, we make need when we come into the world. And if we're lucky, we can go through our life resolving other people's needs in a more productive way than the need we ourselves generate. But that's there's no way to do something truly productive. You have to have a mess before you can clean up the mess. And so it's back to my zero-sum argument that what comes first is the negative, the hunger, the deprivation, the negative state. And the only way to glean any real positive value is to comfort the afflicted. Those afflicted by the burdens of existence now need to be comforted, and so you can do something productive by comforting them. But the fact that you created them is the question of, was there any need to do that? And was there any, and certainly in that evaluation, there's no way to figure out there's anything productive to be accomplished except satisfying your desire. There's no need in the world. There's no victim being raped for you to go save. So doing it would only be something you're satisfying your perception of a need. There's no satisfaction, not satisfying anything the universe cries for. So, but anyway, so I think it's just terribly bogus to sit there and pretend that there's some fundamental flaw in analyzing circumstances where you cause something to exist and you don't cause something to exist, and the value is going to be in prevention. Yes, preventing things does have value. You don't have to create the victim, and then somehow undo the victimhood to do a good thing. If you prevent the victimhood, that's a good. So, enough. Look, 5 videos for this. This is silly. It's a perfectly sensible. If I were to propose whether I should initiate life on Mars, it's certainly a logical question that can be answered logically. It's idiotic to say, no, there's a paradox, there's a fallacy, and even asking the question, should there be life on Mars? It's perfectly sensible. If life is a profitable enterprise, you say yes. If life is nothing but a risk enterprise, for some sort of, you might be able to do it perfect and therefore reach the zero sum, that would be silly. Silly. And human life is silly. Life on Earth is silly. And if you just had the fairness to observe it as Martian life or Plutonian life or Uranian life or Moonican life, if you had the fairness to judge it as if it was some other proposed life form, you'd see it and you'd admit it, that it's too dangerous a thing to play with. Only an idiot and a fool and a reckless, have to be sadistic idiot would play with that kind of fire. So, this is not complicated.